you settle into the hush of evening, where the last of the daylight clings to the edges of the sky like fading ink. The world around you grows softer, quieter, as though the night itself is preparing to lean close and whisper something it has kept hidden for centuries. Tonight, you are not opening a history book. You are opening a gap in history. A gap shaped like a shadow. When most people picture knights, the image is immediate and dazzling. Steel polished to mirror the sun, banners fluttering scarlet and white, swords raised in glory. They are Arthur's shining companions, the Templars guarding pilgrims on desert roads, the Hospitallers tending the wounded, the Teutonic Knights carving castles into the Baltic. Their names are carved into stone and memory, ringing in chronicles, painted on walls, etched into centuries of admiration. But history, if you listen carefully, whispers of another kind. Not knights of brightness, but knights of absence. Not men of gold and silver, but of iron and black. A brotherhood cloaked in silence, spoken of only in fragments and erased as quickly as it appeared. The Black Knights of Europe. The very phrase feels strange in your mouth, doesn't it? Black Knights. It is not a title that gleams. It does not invite praise. It hovers, heavy, uncertain, like the memory of something seen at the corner of the eye, a shape you cannot chase away. You imagine walking through a grand medieval library, its air thick with dust and candle smoke. Shelf upon shelf is filled with chronicles of the crusading orders. The Templars' red cross glowing like fire, the Hospitallers' white cross gleaming against black cloaks, the Teutonics' iron discipline recorded in careful lines. You see the victories, the failures, the long marches eastward, the treaties signed and the castles razed. It is all there. And then you notice it. A gap. A shelf where the parchment has been torn away, where the ink has been deliberately scrubbed. At first it feels like nothing, just empty wood. But the longer you stand before it, the more it begins to hum. Silence, too, has weight. The gap seems to whisper louder than the words around it. Something has been removed. Something was meant not to be seen. That emptiness is where the story begins. The chronicles want you to believe that Europe's knights came in threes: the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonics. 3 points of a holy triangle, 3 pillars of medieval chivalry. But what if there was a fourth? What if there was another order, real enough to fight, powerful enough to be feared, yet remembered only as an outline where ink once lay? What kind of brotherhood lives not in triumphal records, but in erasure? The thought makes you uneasy, doesn't it? Because to be erased is not the same as to be forgotten. To be erased is to have existed so dangerously that silence was the only safe response. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a battlefield in the 13th century. Dust and blood hang in the air. Banners of red and white snap in the wind. And then, beyond the clamor, figures appear. They are clad not in shining mail, but in blackened steel, dark as nightfall. No crests on their shields, no songs on their lips, only silence, moving as one. The chronicles do not sing of them. They barely dare to mention them. A sentence here, a scribbled margin there. But the fragments that remain describe terror so sharp that it could not be ignored. An army that seemed to arrive from nowhere. Riders whose armor drank the sunlight and gave nothing back. Men who left no banners, no trophies, no names, only fear. And so, the story that reaches you is not clean. It does not arrive polished, gilded, or sanctioned by priests. It comes broken, a trail of stones leading into the forest of the past. Each one faint, half-buried, easy to miss. But once you notice them, You cannot look away. What sort of order chooses black as its color, when every other order chose symbols of brightness and glory? What kind of vow would bind men to silence so absolute that history itself falls quiet? What truths were too dangerous to write, too heavy to carry into the light? The Black Knights are not offered to you like a clear tale. They come like a riddle, like missing notes in a song, like the faint outline of a figure painted over, the ghost of a shape beneath fresher paint. And perhaps that is why you are here tonight. Not to hear another retelling of banners and battles, but to lean into the silence, to listen for what has been kept from you, to walk slowly and carefully into the part of Europe's story where shadows are thicker than words. There is a kind of strangeness in this, isn't there? To realize that entire brotherhoods could march, fight, and be feared, yet leave behind only whispers, as though memory itself conspired to hold them at the edges, never letting them settle into certainty. Their presence feels less like a chapter and more like an echo. But echoes, if you follow them, always lead somewhere. Tonight, the silence is your guide. The gaps on the shelves are your map. And the whisper that lingers about black armor, about oaths at midnight, about names never written, is your invitation. So settle in, breathe deeply. The world outside grows dim, and as the candlelight bends, you feel the presence of something else bending with it. A story that was meant to be erased, but which has refused to die. The Black Knights wait in that space between fact and myth. They wait in the silence before the story begins. And now, as you listen, the silence is breaking. The silence that guards the Black Knights is not born in peace. It is born in a Europe that bleeds. To understand their shadow, you must first step into the landscape that shaped them. Close your eyes again. Feel the weight of the 12th and 13th centuries pressing down. It is not the golden age of castles you imagine from storybooks. It is an age where stone crumbles, where bells toll not for prayer, but for warning, where the night carries more dread than rest. Picture a land scarred by endless war. Kingdoms rise and fall like mist on the hills. Borders blur, claimed one year by a duke, another by a king, and lost again to raiders before the next harvest. Even the air feels heavy, thick with the smoke of burned villages, with the scent of rot after plague, with the dust of fields left untended. Everywhere, the echo of conflict. The Crusades had promised glory and salvation. Men left their homes to fight under the cross, believing they marched for heaven. But when they returned, if they returned at all, it was with hollow eyes and broken faith. They had seen deserts soaked in blood, heard prayers drowned in screams, watched kings betray vows for silver and land. Many returned to find their farms gone, their families buried, their souls restless. Disillusioned, displaced, dangerous. They had no place in the light. In this soil of despair, strange brotherhoods take root. Europe itself feels wounded. Castles once proud stand like giants with broken bones, towers cracked, stones blackened by fire. Forests are cut down for siege engines, leaving the earth barren. Monasteries fall silent, their monks carried away by famine or plague. Even the rivers seem sluggish, carrying more ash than fish. You walk down a village lane in this time. The cottages sag, the windows are boarded. A mother clutches her child as soldiers ride past. Behind them, smoke curls up from the thatch of a burning barn. She whispers not of saints, but of shadows, of black-cloaked figures who appear in the distance, too strange to trust, too frightening to forget. This is the Europe that remembers the Black Knights. Faith itself fractures. The church commands obedience, yet whispers of corruption spread from cloisters to taverns. Kings defy popes, popes excommunicate kings, and in the middle, peasants suffer. Heretics are hunted, witches are burned, prophets rise and fall in fire. In such a world, how could another order, unblessed, unacknowledged, survive? Only in shadows, only in secrecy. Imagine the fog that rolls through mountain passes, thick and white, hiding ruins where prayers were once sung. In that fog, you hear hooves. Not the shining parade of knights with banners snapping in the wind, but a darker sound, measured, heavy, deliberate. You lean closer, and through the mist you glimpse them. Figures cloaked in black, armor scorched, faces unseen. They do not march to the Pope's command or to the King's decree. They ride for something else, something nameless. And just as quickly, the fog swallows them. Europe is a fractured body, and in its cracks, the Black Knights move. Consider the silence of monasteries abandoned by war. Stone corridors echo only with the wind. But in the dead of night, travelers whisper. Cloaked figures gather there. Candles flicker in ruined chapels. Oaths are spoken in tones too low to carry beyond the walls. No priest gives blessing. No chronicler records the words. Only the stone remembers, and stone does not speak. The land itself seems to hunger for them. For in times of chaos, people look not only for kings, but for shadows. Figures who can move unseen, who can strike without warning, who answer to no law but their own. This Europe is not the Europe of shining pageants. It is a Europe where children grow up fearing the night more than the sword, where the church's silence is louder than its sermons, where truth itself feels fragile. And in that fragility, the Black Knights are born. You can feel the weight of it, can't you? The despair, the brokenness, the endless battles that never heal. It is a world so scarred that silence becomes a shield. In such a world, perhaps it was inevitable that a brotherhood would rise, who carried no banner, who wore no crest, who moved like a shadow drawn across the map of Europe. And maybe that is why their story lingers, because in the ruins of Europe, where light fails, shadow always grows. Tonight, as you listen, you do not walk the shining halls of kings. You walk among ruined walls, burnt fields, and abandoned churches. And in those ruins, you hear it, the faint echo of hooves, the whisper of a cloak brushing stone, the silence of men who chose not to be remembered. The Europe that gave birth to the Black Knights is gone, but its silence remains. And through that silence, their legend still walks. The chronicles of Europe love neatness. They tell you that there were 3 great pillars of holy knighthood in the Middle Ages, 3 banners carried across deserts, seas, and forests. 3 orders that history decided were worthy of memory. The Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights. 3 feels complete, doesn't it? 3 makes a pattern, a triangle, balanced and whole. A trinity that pleases both faith and story. But the world is rarely so tidy. Imagine again that library of chronicles, rows of manuscripts written in steady monkish hands. You pass the glowing accounts of the Templars, knights in white mantles marked with a red cross, guardians of pilgrims, rumored keepers of hidden treasure. You find the Hospitallers, warriors and healers, their black cloaks lined with a white cross of compassion. You see the Teutonic Knights, marching eastward in black and white, building fortresses that still cast their shadows over the Baltic lands. And then you notice something strange. The picture feels incomplete. The 3 corners shine, but a 4th remains dim. A space unlit, unspoken, as though history itself turned its face away. That darkness is where whispers place the Black Knights, a hidden corner of power, the unacknowledged Fourth Order. It unsettles you, doesn't it? Because if three were celebrated, what would it take for a fourth to be buried? Not forgotten, but erased. The famous orders carved their presence into stone. The Templars built fortresses across Europe and the Holy Land. The Hospitallers raised hospitals and churches. The Teutonics left castles, chronicles, entire territories. Their marks remain as proof of their existence, even when their power waned. But the Black Knights left nothing. No banks, no hospitals, no carved seals in stone. Their absence is their presence. The more you search, the more you find only silence. And yet, the silence does not feel like emptiness. It feels like intention, as though their survival depended not on being celebrated, but on being unseen. Picture Europe as a map painted in bright colors, red for Templars, white for Hospitallers, black and white for Teutonics. But at the edges, at the margins, there is a stain of deeper black, unclaimed, unnamed. That ink blot is where the Black Knights dwell. Why would history write them out? Perhaps because they did not serve the crowns nor the church, but their own vow. Perhaps because they carried truths too dangerous to record. Perhaps because they were never meant to stand in the light at all. The difference between the remembered and the erased becomes the very heart of this mystery. For if one order was meant to be remembered, another was meant to be forgotten. And so, their story begins not with bright proclamations, but with half-erased lines. Not with songs of victory, but with whispers that cling to the silence like smoke. Close your eyes, and you can almost see them. 3 great banners of Christendom raised high, and behind them, a shadow. A company of knights who march without symbols, without blessing, without name. They are the missing corner, the unfinished shape, the silence that refuses to explain itself. It is here in this strange absence that the legend of the Black Knights takes root. Not as a bright star in the sky, but as the dark space between stars. Not as a name carved into chronicles, but as the absence of a name where one should have been. And perhaps this is why they endure in memory. Because silence itself calls to us. Because the missing corner demands to be noticed. Tonight, you are standing at that corner. You are looking into the dark part of the pattern, where history's ink has run thin. And in that space, you begin to feel it. The presence of something erased, but not gone. The Black Knights were the order that time tried to forget. And yet, their shadow still waits, daring you to follow it deeper. The Middle Ages loved symbols. Every knight who rode into battle bore them proudly. A red cross painted on white, a golden lion sewn into a banner, a silver eagle etched into steel. These were not decorations. They were identities. They told the world who you were, where you belonged, and what you fought for. To ride without such signs was unthinkable. It was as if you had no lineage, no oath, no place in the great tapestry of faith and war. And yet, the Black Knights rode with nothing. Their armor was not polished to shine, but darkened as though kissed by flame. Their cloaks were not sewn with crosses or lions, but left bare. When they appeared, there was no crest to greet the eye, no colors to separate friend from foe. Only the black. The choice was not accidental. In an age obsessed with pageantry, black was a declaration more startling than any symbol. Think of what black meant to the medieval mind. It was the color of monks' robes, silence, humility, renunciation of earthly pride. It was also the color of plague carts, of burial shrouds, of of charred villages smoldering after raids. It carried at once the image of devotion and of doom. To see a figure clad entirely in black was to wonder, saint or demon? Imagine standing on a battlefield at dawn. The mist clings low to the ground. Through it, you see the gleam of polished steel on one side. Knights in shining armor, their crosses blazing. Trumpets call, banners snap, voices shout their cries of allegiance. And then, from the shadows, another sound. Hooves, slow and deliberate. Out of the mist come riders cloaked in black, their armor so dark it seems to drink the light. No banners, no shouts, no music of war, only silence. How would you feel seeing them? Would you believe them men at all? Or spirits risen from some older age, sent to remind you that victory and defeat are both swallowed, in the end, by the grave? Their blackness was a weapon in itself. Soldiers who faced them whispered later that arrows seemed to vanish into their cloaks, that swords glanced off armor as though it carried a blessing, or a curse. Enemies broke ranks, not because the Black Knights were many, but because they seemed to embody something more than human. Fear spread faster than steel. To wear black was to defy the rules of medieval war, where color announced sides and symbols gave courage. The Black Knights stripped it all away. They made themselves unreadable. In a world where every image was sacred, they became a blank page. And blankness is frightening, because the mind rushes to fill it with its darkest imagination. Perhaps their armor had been scorched on purpose, tempered in fire until it carried the look of ruin. Some claim the steel was blackened by ritual, marked with secret oils or charred as part of their oaths. Others thought it a disguise, meant to hide their true allegiance. But no matter the reason, the effect was the same. On the field, they appeared less like men and more like living shadows. Picture their cloaks whipping in the wind, long and heavy, folding their forms until they seemed to melt into smoke. In the haze of battle, it was difficult to know where the men ended and the darkness began. Even allies grew uneasy. To fight beside such figures was to feel as though one stood on the edge of the grave, flanked by companions who looked already claimed by death, yet still walking. And perhaps that was the point. For in silence, in shadow, in anonymity, the Black Knights found their strength. They turned the absence of symbols into a symbol of its own, a refusal to be claimed by kings or priests, a vow that they would serve only the Brotherhood, not the world. Theirs was armor not of pride, but of mystery, not polished to reflect the sun, but forged to embody the night, not a declaration of who they were, but a denial of everything else. And that denial lingered. It lingered in the fear of soldiers who fled at their approach. It lingered in the whispers of peasants who called them specters. It lingered in the imagination of monks who scribbled half-sentences in the margins of chronicles, too afraid to give them a name. The Black Knights knew what others did not, that silence could be louder than any trumpet, and shadow more terrifying than any banner. Even now, when you close your eyes, you can see them. Figures wrapped in black steel, faces hidden, voices withheld. You can hear the quiet rhythm of hooves, the wind catching in heavy cloaks, the absence of sound where war usually roars. And that silence calls to you. It asks you not to look at the gleaming banners, but at the gaps between them. Not at the light, but at the darkness that defines it. For in that armor of shadows lies a truth older than victory, that fear itself is the greatest weapon of all. And the Black Knights wielded it better than anyone. History, we are told, is written in ink. But sometimes It is written in hesitation, in words left vague, in silences heavy enough to feel like omissions. The story of the Black Knights does not enter Europe's chronicles through bold proclamations or triumphant records. It arrives instead as shadows in the margins. Open a medieval manuscript in your mind. The parchment is yellowed, the ink brown with age. Monks bent over these pages for hours, quills scratching by candlelight. Their duty was sacred, to record truth as faithfully as their hands could. Yet even here, among careful lines of prayers, lists of kings, accounts of wars, you find something strange. Small notes, brief descriptions, words that seem hurried, almost afraid. One monk writes of riders in black armor without banners, appearing at dawn and gone by dusk. Nothing more. No names, no allegiance, no explanation. Just a fragment, left like a footprint in snow. Another records a battle in France where unknown horsemen arrived, fought fiercely, and vanished before anyone could ask who they served. He does not call them saints, nor demons, nor mercenaries. He calls them nothing at all. Why such vagueness? Because words were dangerous. In the medieval world, to write something was to make it real. To name an order was to grant it presence in the eyes of history, to invite questions, to draw attention from church and crown. Better, perhaps, to leave it unnamed. Better to write just enough that truth could not be wholly denied, but not enough that the truth could be clearly seen. And so the Black Knights haunt these chronicles like faint candlelight in a drafty hall, flickering, unsteady, there but not there. A German scribe speaks of black riders who defended a monastery from raiders, then refused reward and vanished into the forest. A Spanish monk, more poetic than precise, describes warriors who came like spirits of vengeance and left as if swallowed by the earth. Each account is brief, each avoids certainty, and yet, together, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. You begin to notice the repetition. Armor darkened, banners absent, silence kept. Always the same features, no matter the land, no matter the century. It is as though multiple hands, scattered across Europe, were sketching the same shape in the margins of their books, never daring to draw it in full, but unable to let it pass without mark. The very lack of detail becomes suspicious, for scribes delighted in detail when it came to other orders. The Templars' deeds fill volumes. The Hospitallers' hospitals are praised in glowing prose. The Teutonic Knights' conquests are listed in careful chronicles. But the Black Knights? Only shadows, only silence. It is almost as if someone instructed the chroniclers, do not record them fully. Let them be mentioned only in passing. Do not give them the dignity of history. Erase them with absence. But silence, too, speaks. You can feel it when you read those lines. The restraint, the tension, as if the monk wrote quickly and then stopped, his quill hovering above the parchment. Did he fear his abbot's eyes? Did he recall warnings not to speak too much of certain men? Or did he feel in his bones that what he was recording was not for the world to know? The chronicles that survive are not only documents of memory, they are also documents of fear. And yet, for all their brevity, the fragments carry power, because even a half-erased sentence can echo across centuries. Even a vague reference can stir imagination. The fact that these figures appear at all in manuscripts meant to preserve order and clarity suggests that their presence could not be ignored. Imagine the monk dipping his quill in ink, pausing, and then writing, Malits Nigri, Black Knights. He does not elaborate. Perhaps he looks over his shoulder. Perhaps he scratches the words lightly, almost as though to make them easy to erase. But he writes them, and in doing so, he leaves us a whisper that survives when louder voices are gone. You turn the pages of these old books, and you begin to see them differently. The blank spaces are not emptiness. They are barriers. They are silence deliberately chosen. And between those silences, you glimpse the outlines of something large, something that frightens the hands that wrote. The chronicles give us no full story. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the Black Knights existed not to be recorded, but to be concealed. Perhaps their very survival depended on being reduced to whispers, to mentions that fade like smoke in the margins. And in that reduction, they became untouchable. Tonight, you sit with those parchments in your mind. The ink fades, the lines blur, the margins seem to flicker with shadows of their own. You hear the silence more than the words, and in that silence, you feel the weight of the Brotherhood who chose to be unseen. They ride not through the bright pages of history, but through its gaps. Not in the songs of victory, but in the spaces where quills hesitated. Not in the light of chronicles, but in the shadows between lines. And maybe that is the truest record of all. Every legend has a birthplace. For the Black Knights, the whispers point again and again to the dust and blood of the Crusades. The Crusades were not just wars of faith. They were furnaces that melted men's loyalties, breaking them down into fragments of belief, ambition, and despair. Across deserts and mountains, armies marched with banners high, convinced they carried the will of God. And yet, many returned with hearts broken, their faith in crowns and crosses turned to ash. It is in this crucible of disillusion that the Black Knights are said to have been forged. Picture a camp in the Holy Land. The banners of the great orders hang limp in the heat. The Templars polish their steel, white mantles marked with red crosses bright in the sun. The Hospitallers tend to the wounded, their black cloaks spread like wings of compassion. The Teutonic Knights drill in harsh discipline, their black and white banners snapping against the wind. And then, apart from them, a smaller fire burns low. Around it sit men who have removed their symbols, who refuse to wear the crests of the orders that betrayed them. Their armor is darkened, scorched by battles that gave them no victory. Their voices are low, and when they speak, it is not of Jerusalem or Rome, but of silence, secrecy, survival. These are the men who, the stories say, would become the Black Knights. Some whisper that they were deserters, men who walked away from the red cross of the Templars, stripping their mantles in disgust after seeing corruption and greed rot the order from within. Others say they were exiles, cast out for breaking vows, for daring to question the authority of priests, for seeking truths in places the church forbade. And still others believe they were chosen, selected by unseen masters to form a shadow brotherhood, one that could carry out missions too dark to be tied to the holy orders. What is clear is that their birth, if it happened, belonged to failure more than triumph. For by the late 12th and 13th centuries, the great crusading spirit was fractured. Jerusalem was lost. Armies once swollen with zeal limped back to Europe, broken and bitter. The holy wars had created not saints, but skeptics. Men who had seen enough blood to know that the banners of Christendom did not always mean justice. Imagine such a man. He has crossed seas, fought in scorching deserts, buried his brothers in foreign soil. He returns home, but no one greets him as a hero. The lords squabble. The church demands more tithes. The peasants still starve. His sacrifice feels wasted. His vows feel hollow. And in the emptiness of his faith, he seeks something else, something silent, something free of crowns and councils. The Black Knights may have been born from such men. Warriors too skilled to abandon the sword, too restless to kneel before kings, too scarred to trust the promises of priests. Their answer was not rebellion in the open, but secrecy in the shadows. Some accounts claim that their vows were first sworn not in Europe, but in the East, perhaps in the ruins of a captured fortress, or in a chapel where the walls still echoed with Muslim prayers. There, under midnight stars, a small circle of men pledged themselves not to Rome, not to monarchs, but to each other. Their oaths were sealed in silence and in blood, binding them into a brotherhood that belonged only to itself. If true, this would explain why the chronicles hesitate to name them, for their origins were not pure in the eyes of history. They were forged not by papal blessing, but by disillusion, exile, and secrecy. And yet, paradoxically, this gave them power. For while the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights tied themselves to councils, rules, and politics, the Black Knights owed nothing to anyone outside their circle. They were unbound, unclaimed, beholden only to their vow. This made them dangerous. This made them unpredictable. And in an age when armies were defined by symbols and banners, their refusal to be named turned them into living enigmas. The Crusades birthed many legends of holy relics, of forbidden knowledge, of warriors touched by both grace and sin. But the Black Knights stand apart because their legend is one of erasure. The Templars returned home with riches, the Hospitallers with hospitals, the Teutonic Knights with territories. The Black Knights returned with nothing but silence, and turned that silence into a shield. Close your eyes and imagine them again. Not in gleaming lines of crusading armies, but as a handful of men slipping away from the campfires, cloaks pulled close, leaving behind the bright banners of Christendom. They ride into the night, their armor already darkened, their faces already set against the world. They do not seek victory. They do not seek glory. They seek only to endure. This is how legends say they were born, not in triumph, but in disillusion, not in the light of God's favor, but in the shadow of human failure. And perhaps that is why they linger in memory, because their story is not one of saints or martyrs, but of men who chose secrecy over spectacle, silence over sermons, shadow over sunlight. Born from the Crusades, they carried forward not the zeal of holy war, but the bitterness of betrayal, the silence of exile, and the power of secrecy. And in that silence, they found immortality. Every order has its vow. The Templars knelt before priests, swearing loyalty on relics of saints. The Hospitallers spoke words of charity and battle, binding themselves to both sword and mercy. The Teutonic Knights pledged obedience to Rome, their oaths written carefully in ink and preserved in charters. But the Black Knights, if the whispers are true, bound themselves in a way unlike any other. Not in daylight, not in churches, not before witnesses. Their oaths belonged to midnight. Imagine it now. A ruined chapel stands in silence, its roof broken open so that stars stare coldly down. The air is thick with the smell of damp stone. A single circle of candles burns, their flames small but steady, casting more shadow than light. Around the circle stand men cloaked in black, their faces hidden by hoods. One by one, they step forward, not to speak loudly, but to whisper. Their words are not recorded in ink, No scribe writes them down, for to write would be to leave evidence, and evidence is the enemy of secrecy. Instead, each man whispers his vow into the silence, binding it to memory, to blood, to shadow. The stories say the ritual was simple, yet heavy with meaning. Each recruit would strip away every symbol of his past. Crests removed, names forgotten, even family ties severed. He stood not as a son of a house, not as a servant of a king, but as no one, nothing, a blank slate. Then, in the stillness of midnight, he became someone else, a brother of shadows. The sealing of the vow was not done with pen and ink, but with blade and blood. Each man would draw a cut across his hand, pressing it into the hand of another, mingling blood until their bodies carried the same scar, the same mark. The drops that fell to the chapel floor were said to remain there forever. Dark stains in the stone, reminders that their bond was written not in parchment, but in flesh. And the vow itself? It was not long, nor elaborate. Some whispers say it was as simple as this: silence above all, loyalty beyond blood, betrayal punished by death. Others claim it was longer, a litany of promises. Never to bow to priest or king, never to reveal the secrets of the order, never to act for wealth or glory, only for the Brotherhood itself. But no one truly knows, because no written oath survives. Only rumors, fragments, and the scars of silence left behind. Why midnight? Because it was the hour when the world itself seemed to pause. The bells had long since fallen quiet, the villages lay in sleep, the day's toils forgotten. Midnight was the border between what was seen and unseen, between order and chaos, between life and death. To speak vows then was to bind them, not to the noise of human society, but to the silence of the unseen. And silence was the heart of the vow. For to speak of the Brotherhood outside its walls was to betray it. To reveal its rituals, its names, its symbols, was to mark oneself for death. Legends say that any knight who broke the vow was hunted without mercy, tracked across mountains and forests until the hand that once pressed in blood became the hand that guided the sword of judgment against him. There was no forgiveness. There was only silence restored. This gave their bond a power stronger than kinship. Families could be betrayed. Kings could be usurped. Even priests could fall from faith. But the Black Knights swore an oath that demanded everything: their past, their future, their very names. They ceased to belong to themselves. They belonged to the silence. Imagine how it must have felt to stand in that ruined chapel, a hood over your head, candlelight trembling against broken walls. To lift your hand, cut it, feel blood drip down your wrist. To press that hand into another's until the pain bound you tighter than parchment ever could. To whisper your vow into the silence and know that no priest, no crown, no god but shadow itself had heard you. What kind of man would embrace such a vow? Perhaps one who had lost faith in the bright banners of holy war. Perhaps one who no longer trusted the justice of kings or the purity of priests. Perhaps one who craved belonging not to a family that had cast him aside, but to a brotherhood that erased all names and gave him a new identity. Faceless, silent, unbreakable. For them, the oath at midnight was not a ritual. It was a rebirth. The world outside would never know their names again. Their stories would never be written. They became shadows, fused into a single brotherhood that moved like a tide, silent and black, carrying with them not only swords, but secrets too dangerous to live in daylight. When you think of it, perhaps this is why no record survives. The absence of parchment, the lack of charters, the silence of Rome. These are not accidents. They are the vow itself. The oath at midnight demanded that nothing of them should be written, nothing remembered but the fear of their cloaks in the dark. And in that silence lies their immortality. For what cannot be written cannot be erased. What is sworn in blood cannot be undone by ink. And what is bound at midnight lives forever in the shadow between memory and myth. Tonight, as you close your eyes, picture that circle of candles. See the cloaked figures step forward, one by one, each leaving behind his name, his family, his past. Hear the whisper of blades cutting flesh, the quiet drip of blood on stone. Smell the smoke of melted wax. Feel the weight of silence pressing on the ruined walls. The oath is never spoken aloud for us to hear, but in the hush of your imagination, it lingers. An echo of words sworn in shadows, sealed forever in silence. An oath alone does not make a knight. Steel must be sharpened, bodies must be hardened, and wills must be bent until they do not break. And yet, the training of the Black Knights, if the whispers are true, was unlike that of any other brotherhood in Europe. The Templars drilled in castles and fields, their ranks lined in white and red, banners snapping as priests blessed their blades. The Hospitallers mixed combat with care, tending to the wounded even as they practiced the art of war. The Teutonic Knights lived under strict discipline, their training a rhythm of prayers and marches, always under the watchful eyes of their superiors. But the Black Knights, they trained where no one could see, not in the light of open fields, but in the silence of forests, not in the safety of castles, but among ruins and graves, not in the noise of drums and horns, but in the eerie quiet of midnight. Legends say their training grounds were hidden far from the gaze of kings or clergy. A ruined abbey swallowed by vines, a cave where the only sound was dripping water, a clearing in the woods where even birds dared not sing. Here, new recruits were stripped of more than their names. They were stripped of comfort. Food was scarce. Sleep was a luxury. Days of hunger and nights of cold taught them to endure long before they ever raised a blade. They learned to move as shadows. Cloaks drawn close, steps muffled against earth. They practiced slipping through trees without disturbing a single leaf, crossing streams without leaving ripples, breathing so quietly that even their horses seemed to fade into the mist. They learned to strike without warning. Ambush became their art. Where other knights fought in gleaming lines, shouting cries of valor, the Black Knights were trained to melt from the dark, to fall upon their enemies like thunder out of silence, to vanish before the foe could even draw breath. They learned patience. Tales tell of recruits forced to stand for hours in ruined cloisters with only a single candle, forbidden to move or speak as shadows shifted around them. If fear broke them, they were dismissed. Or worse, if they endured, they became statues of discipline, unmoving even when strange sounds echoed through the night. Cruelty was part of their shaping. Some say recruits were abandoned in graveyards, left alone among bones and silence, told to hold vigil until dawn without flinching at the presence of death. Others whisper of trials where men were sent deep into forests with nothing but a knife, commanded to survive until they returned, whether it took days or weeks. And always, silence. No shouts of encouragement, no hymns, no blessings. The Black Knights trained without noise, their drills carried out in an eerie hush that unnerved even their own. The clash of steel was the only sound, and when it ended, silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. To master silence was to master fear. For in silence, the imagination awakens. And the Black Knights learned to wield that fear as a weapon sharper than any sword. They hardened their bodies as much as their minds, running through forests in full armor until sweat poured like rain, fighting blindfolded to sharpen instinct, holding burning brands in their hands until the skin blistered to teach endurance. Every trial stripped away weakness until only iron discipline remained. And yet, it was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was transformation. For the recruit who survived such training no longer thought of himself as a man of flesh and blood. He became a shadow wrapped in steel. Hunger could not break him. Darkness could not terrify him. Silence could not unnerve him. He had been molded into something the world could not understand. And that was exactly the point. Villagers whispered of these training grounds. Peasants working their fields at night swore they heard steel ringing from deep within forests, followed by sudden, unnatural quiet. Travelers passing ruined monasteries spoke of flickering lights and hooded figures moving wordlessly through the cloisters. No banners, no voices, only the uncanny presence of men who seemed less like knights and more like phantoms rehearsing for war. And so the Black Knights built their greatest weapon, not in forges, but in silence. Other orders trained to be seen. The Black Knights trained to be unseen. Other knights announced themselves with horns and banners. The Black Knights appeared without warning, already inside the enemy's fear. Imagine standing among them as a recruit. You are cold, hungry, your body trembling from exhaustion. Around you, cloaked figures move silently, their faces hidden. You are commanded to strike, to fall, to rise again, but no one praises you, no one curses you. Only silence answers. At first, you crave a word, a voice, any sound to prove you are not alone. But the silence remains. Hours pass, days, until silence itself becomes your companion, until you no longer fear it, but welcome it. And when the silence becomes natural, you understand the secret. Silence is not absence. Silence is power. This was the heart of their training, to become men who carried the night itself as armor. Silent, patient, disciplined beyond fear. Knights who needed no banners, who sought no recognition, who carried only the memory of pain and the strength of secrecy. By the time they left these hidden grounds, they were no longer recruits. They were phantoms. Riders who moved without sound, warriors who struck without warning, shadows that left only terror in their wake. And this, perhaps, was why their enemies remembered them not as men, but as demons. For training had stripped away their humanity and replaced it with silence, discipline, and fear. Close your eyes and hear it now. Not the clamor of armies, not the shouts of kings, only the eerie rhythm of cloaks moving in the night, only the faint ring of steel clashing once, twice, then vanishing again into silence. This was the sound of the Black Knight's training. Not noise, but the absence of it. Not glory, but the shaping of shadows. Not honor, but survival. And in that silence, they became immortal. Every knight wore a symbol. The red cross of the Templars, the white star of the Hospitallers, the black and white cross of the Teutons. These colors were banners of faith and allegiance, painted across shields, stitched into cloaks, polished into steel so bright it reflected the sun. But the Black Knights chose something else. They chose the absence of all banners. They chose black. Imagine a battlefield in the late Middle Ages. The sun glints on rows of silver armor. Shields dazzle the eyes with lions, eagles, and crosses. Trumpets blast, horns echo, prayers are shouted to heaven. Every order cries its allegiance for all to see. And then, In the corner of your vision, you notice movement. Figures emerge from the mist, not bright and not shining, but cloaked in shadow. Their armor is blackened, scorched as though tempered in fire. Their cloaks are long and dark and heavy, blending into the smoke of war. They bear no symbols, no crests, no signs of family or order, only silence. The clash of armies pauses for a heartbeat. Soldiers murmur, "Who are they? Which banner do they serve? Are they friends or demons?" This was the power of black. In the medieval mind, color was more than decoration, it was language. White meant purity, red meant sacrifice, gold meant glory, and black meant mystery. Black meant mourning, black meant the grave. To wear black was to reject the pageantry of war, to strip away the vanity of crests and heraldry, and to step onto the battlefield as something beyond ordinary men. To peasants, it was terrifying. To enemies, it was paralyzing. And even to allies, it was unsettling. For how do you trust a man who hides his colors? How do you follow a knight who carries no banner? The Black Knights understood this unease. They used it as their weapon. Their armor did not shine to inspire. It swallowed light to terrify. Their cloaks did not flutter with symbols of saints. They dragged across the ground like shadows made flesh. Some say their armor was not painted black, but burned black, that each piece was scorched in fire until the steel turned dark and carried with it the memory of flame. This would have made their armor stronger, tempered, and hardened. But to those who saw it, it seemed cursed, as though each knight carried fire from hell across his body. Their cloaks, too, were more than fabric. In wind and smoke, they blurred the line between man and shadow, making them look like phantoms drifting through chaos. Enemies swore they could not tell where the cloaks ended and the night began. To some, this blackness spoke of humility, a rejection of pride, a denial of the polished vanity of knights who treated armor like jewels. The Black Knights, it was said, stripped away the glitter of the world to remind themselves that flesh is dust, that life is shadow, that death rides with every man. But to others, the blackness was a proclamation of dread, a warning that these knights were no longer bound by the rules of honor and heraldry, that they belonged not to kings or crowns, but to something darker, an order outside of the light. This duality made them unforgettable. Were they saints disguised in mourning, or demons dressed for war? The ambiguity was their greatest shield. Consider the silence of battle when they rode. Other knights charged with cries of war, with trumpets sounding, with prayers shouted to heaven. But the Black Knights came wordless, the thundering of hooves swallowed by the eerie hush of men who refused to shout. To see blackened steel advancing without sound was to feel the approach of death itself. Fear moved faster than their blades. And in a world where armies broke more often from terror than from wounds, this fear was more powerful than arrows, more deadly than swords. The symbolism of black reached beyond the battlefield. It was the color of monks' robes, of silence, discipline, and withdrawal from worldly affairs. Yet it was also the color of plague carts, of burning villages, of burial shrouds. To wear black was to walk the line between holy renunciation and unholy dread. The Black Knights lived on that line. They were cloaked in paradox, both monks and warriors, both shadows of humility and omens of death. And because no one could decide which they were, they became both at once. Imagine standing across from them in battle. The sun glints off your polished steel, your crest bright upon your shield. You lift your sword, ready to strike. And then you see them, dark shapes moving in silence, cloaks streaming like smoke. Their armor absorbs the light, their helmets hide their faces, and you realize you cannot name them. Friend or foe, saint or demon, man or ghost. The answer never comes. They strike, and then they vanish, leaving you with nothing but fear. Perhaps this is why their legend endured long after chronicles erased their name. Because the image of blackened armor and faceless cloaks is stronger than any written word. People remembered not their battles, not their victories, but the way they looked, the way they made others feel, the dread that silence and shadow could inspire. Armor becomes more than steel when it carries such weight. It becomes myth, and in that myth, the Black Knights endure, not as conquerors with banners and castles, but as shadows whose very color made them mortal. Close your eyes tonight and picture them riding across a battlefield. Not shining, not shouting, not seeking glory. Only black armor scorched by flame, only cloaks whipping like shadows in the wind. Only silence louder than any horn. This was their symbol. This was their weapon. This was their curse. The armor of shadow. The battlefield was never silent. It screamed with clashing steel, groaning men, trumpets, drums, and the cries of the wounded. Smoke stung the eyes, blood choked the earth, and prayers mingled with curses as banners tore in the wind. And yet, when the Black Knights came, silence spread before them like a plague. Imagine dawn breaking on a misty field in France. Two armies stand locked in chaos, horses shrieking, men shouting, shields cracking. Then, through the haze, a new sound rises. The steady thunder of hooves, too many to count, moving as one. Soldiers turn their heads, expecting banners, expecting color. But what they see instead freezes their blood. Riders cloaked in black, armor scorched dark, reflecting no light, no crests, no cries, no prayer to God. They advance in silence, their cloaks whipping like smoke, their visors down, their faces lost. For a heartbeat, the world itself seems to hold its breath. Then they strike. Accounts from frightened scribes tell of men dropping weapons and fleeing at the sight alone. Veterans of the Crusades, soldiers who had fought in deserts and sieges, confessed that they had never known fear like this. They swore that the air itself grew colder when the Black Knights approached, as though death had stepped onto the field. Some enemies believed arrows could not wound them, that blades glanced off their armor as if it were enchanted. One German commander claimed he saw a knight rise again after being struck down, fueling rumors that these were not men, but phantoms returned from the grave. Spanish peasants whispered of voices on the battlefield, not human shouts, but strange murmurs carried on the wind, as though shadows themselves were whispering in forgotten tongues. Perhaps these were illusions of terror, born from exhausted eyes and trembling hearts. But perhaps they were something more, for fear itself was their weapon. Where other orders fought with the brilliance of steel, the Black Knights fought with dread. To their foes, they were not simply warriors, they were omens. Living reminders that every battle ends in death. Picture the moment of their charge. No war cry, no banner raised, only the hiss of cloaks and the clatter of hooves. Soldiers strain their ears, waiting for the familiar sounds of combat, but instead they are met with quiet, a quiet so unnatural it claws at the mind. And then the first blade strikes, cold and efficient, and silence breaks into screams. By the time allies gather their courage, the Black Knights are gone, vanished into smoke, leaving only corpses and the memory of shadows that moved like water through fire. To peasants watching from the hills, It was as if night itself had ridden into battle. They described men who seemed less flesh than mist, warriors whose cloaks melted into smoke, whose armor flickered with an otherworldly glow, as if tempered not in earthly forges, but in flames of judgment. And when the battle ended, the strangeness lingered. Other knights demanded recognition, sought reward, claimed victory in the name of king or cross. The Black Knights left nothing. No words, no claims, no trophies. Only the echo of fear. The sight of them unsettled even their allies. To fight beside them was to feel as though one stood on the edge of a grave. For the Black Knights did not cheer in triumph, did not kneel in prayer, did not speak to comrades. They stood in silence, cloaked in black, waiting. It was said that when they rode into war, even their horses bore the mark of dread. Eyes glinting in torchlight, breath misting like smoke, hooves striking the earth with a rhythm too perfect, too relentless. Some swore these steeds were not natural at all, but creatures of the underworld, carrying their riders as messengers of death. To enemies, they were demons. To peasants, they were omens. To their rivals, they were shadows that threatened the order of the world. But to themselves, what were they? Perhaps they believed their silence and their blackened steel made them servants of something higher than kings. Perhaps they saw themselves as guardians of knowledge, as keepers of vows, as warriors who fought not for glory, but for secrets. Or perhaps they embraced the fear they inspired, knowing that in a world ruled by banners and color, to be faceless and nameless was the greatest power of all. Their presence burned itself into memory. Survivors carried their terror into villages and monasteries, where stories grew larger with every telling. Each battle became legend, each sighting a ghost story, each cloak whipping through smoke, a reminder that shadows could kill. And though their names were erased, their image endured. Men cloaked in black, armor scorched dark as if by fire. Silent riders who brought death without word or banner. The image alone was enough to haunt Europe for centuries. Close your eyes tonight and imagine standing on that battlefield. You hear horns blare, swords clash, men cry out. But then the sound begins to fade. Through the smoke, you see them. No banners, no colors, only black steel and cloaks moving as one. Their silence strikes you deeper than any blade, because it tells you this: you are already defeated. And as they pass, leaving only fire and blood in their wake, you realize why their legend survived. Not because they won battles, but because they became fear itself. Fear is powerful, but fear alone does not create legend. To explain the silence of the Black Knights, to explain their blackened steel and their vanishing into mist, the people of medieval Europe turned to a darker answer. They whispered of rituals. They muttered of forbidden prayers. They spoke of powers not blessed by Rome. And so, alongside their image as warriors, another shadow took form, the shadow of sorcery. In taverns, peasants told stories of the Black Knights gathering at midnight in ruined chapels. Not to pray to saints, but to kneel before strange symbols carved into stone. Circles of fire, serpents and suns, signs that no priest could bless. The air thick with incense, the voices of men chanting in languages older than Latin, older even than Rome. Monks wrote cautiously in margins of chronicles, their words trembling as though they feared to be accused of blasphemy. They described cloaks lined with runes, helmets etched with markings that reminded them of pagan chants. Some swore these were invocations, words of power that gave the Black Knights their resilience. words never meant to be spoken by Christians. Enemies accused them of calling upon spirits before battle. Priests muttered that their silence was not discipline, but devotion to darker forces. Even allies whispered that they prayed, but not to God, that their oaths bound them to something older, something that walked with them unseen when they rode into war. It was said their cloaks carried secret linings, stitched with letters that glowed faintly when held to fire. That their swords bore inscriptions invisible in daylight, revealed only at night. That when they took their oath at midnight, they called not only on one another, but on shadows themselves. Where did such whispers come from? Some believed the Black Knights had stolen this knowledge during the Crusades, secrets taken from mystics in the East, scrolls written in tongues long forgotten, diagrams of stars and cycles that revealed more than ordinary men were meant to know. Others claimed they uncovered hidden texts in Europe itself, relics of pagan temples and forgotten brotherhoods buried before Christendom spread. Whatever the origin, the suspicion was the same. Their silence hid more than secrecy. It hid forbidden wisdom. Even their blackened armor became part of the rumor. If fire had scorched their steel, was it earthly fire or ritual fire, a burning that marked them as initiates into something unholy? Did the flames purify them of weakness, or bind them to powers that ordinary men feared to name? Peasants swore that when the Black Knights rode past, the air grew heavy. The torches dimmed, candles flickered, and dogs howled as though sensing a presence unseen. Some claimed the knights themselves whispered in forgotten tongues during battle, not shouting cries but murmuring invocations that froze enemies' blood. The symbols tied to them fueled even darker tales. Carvings of serpents, patterns of stars, suns enclosed in circles. To the church, such images reeked of heresy. To the common folk, they reeked of power. Power that frightened priests enough to forbid its mention. Power that gave peasants both fear and hope. For if these knights truly held knowledge older than Rome, then perhaps they guarded truths that the world was not meant to see. But what if it was all slander? The Templars themselves were accused of worshiping idols, of kissing the devil's image, of practicing secret rites. Accusations of heresy were the weapon of choice against any brotherhood that grew too strong or too secret. The Black Knights, cloaked in shadows and silence, made the perfect target. If they rejected banners and refused prayers, was it not natural for the fearful to assume they were bound to darker gods? Perhaps their silence was discipline, not invocation. Perhaps their symbols were misunderstood marks of unity. Perhaps their rituals were nothing more than midnight oaths spoken in secrecy to protect themselves from betrayal. And yet, the whispers linger, because silence invites imagination, and imagination often paints the darkest picture. Close your eyes now. Picture them again. A ruined chapel lit only by fire. Cloaked men kneeling in a circle, their faces hidden, their voices low. The words they speak are not recorded, not preserved in ink. Perhaps they were prayers. Perhaps they were curses. Perhaps they were both. What mattered was not the truth, but the impression. And the impression was this: these knights were more than warriors. They were initiates, not bound only to flesh and steel, but to mysteries too old and too dangerous to name. This is why their legend blurred into the occult. Because in a world where everything had meaning, where colors, symbols, and rituals carried weight, the absence of explanation was terrifying. To refuse to show banners, to march in silence, to vanish after battle, such things demanded an answer. And when no answer was given, people filled the void with whispers of sorcery. Perhaps they did not worship demons. Perhaps they guarded knowledge. Perhaps they drew strength from silence itself, turning fear into their ritual, secrecy into their sacrament. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Their silence became not emptiness, but the echo of something forbidden. And once that idea took root, no decree of the church, no denial of historians could erase it. Even now, centuries later, their name clings to the shadows of the occult. Secret societies, alchemists, and mystics all claim ties to their hidden rituals. Some say their symbols survived in lodges. Others that their invocations still linger in manuscripts no priest dares to read. The Black Knights, real or not, became guardians not only of shadow, but of secrets. The kind of secrets that burn too brightly for daylight. And perhaps that was their true power, not their swords, not their silence, but the fear that what they knew could never be erased. Close your eyes on one last time tonight. Hear the whispers of men chanting in languages you cannot understand. See the glow of runes against scorched steel. Smell the incense rising in ruined halls. Feel the silence pressing in, thick and heavy, as if the shadows themselves are listening. You may never know if the Black Knights were sorcerers or saints, heretics or guardians. But one truth remains. Their silence carried more weight than words. And in that silence, the occult was born. Rome had words for everyone. For saints, it offered praise. For heretics, it offered fire. For holy orders, it offered charters, blessings, and papal seal. But for the Black Knights, Rome offered nothing. No decree of recognition, no papal bull of condemnation, only silence. This silence was louder than thunder. The Templars had documents signed by popes themselves, legitimizing their mission to guard pilgrims and fight for Christendom. The Hospitallers were honored for their hospitals, blessed in their vows. The Teutonic Knights marched with the open support of Rome, their black and white cross flying high. The Black Knights, however, appeared in no such records. They were tolerated, yet never embraced, mentioned, yet never explained, as if the church chose to look away. Why? Some whispered that Rome feared them, not fear in the way one fears an army, but fear in the way one fears a shadow moving just outside the candlelight, close enough to unsettle, too uncertain to confront. If the Black Knights were heretics, why not burn them as the church did with so many others? If they were brothers in Christ, why not bless them and bring them into the fold? The refusal to name them left them in limbo, neither holy nor damned, existing in a space where rumor thrived. Priests who dared to speak of them chose vague words. Chroniclers called them unknown riders or men without banners, never daring to write the name clearly. Bishops occasionally warned against dark brotherhoods in sermons, but never gave details. Was this ignorance or deliberate avoidance? Imagine standing in a medieval cathedral, listening to a sermon heavy with warnings. The priest speaks of dangers in the shadows, of men who refuse holy banners, of whispers carried by demons. Yet he never names them. The people murmur to one another, filling the gaps themselves. The Black Knights. The silence became their identity. Some historians believe this was a calculated choice by Rome. Condemnation would have spread their name. Trials would have carved their existence into stone, just as the Templars' downfall etched their memory forever. But silence. Silence was more effective. It erased. It let them dissolve into shadows without leaving a mark. Others argue the opposite, that Rome truly did not know what to make of them. Were they mercenaries? A rogue splinter of the Templars? A local brotherhood mistaken for something greater? Perhaps the church avoided naming them simply because naming them would mean admitting ignorance. In either case, silence was safer. But silence has its cost. For the people of Europe, Rome's refusal to condemn was unsettling. If the church did not declare them heretics, perhaps they were not heretics at all. Perhaps they were something worse. Too close to name, too dangerous to confront, too useful to destroy. Rumors grew that the Black Knights were tools of the Vatican itself, an invisible blade sent to strike where official orders could not. Others claimed the church wanted them gone, but dared not say it aloud, fearing what secrets the knights might reveal in retaliation. The absence of words created more questions than answers. Imagine the papal archives, rows of parchment, charters, decrees, pages for the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutons. And then a gap. No record, no blessing, no curse. A space where something should be, but is not. That emptiness calls to you, daring you to wonder what was removed or why it was never written at all. What is more dangerous to memory than condemnation? Erasure. For some, this silence became proof that the Black Knights guarded truths Rome could not allow to spread. Knowledge older than Christianity. Relics more powerful than any relics displayed in churches. Manuscripts that connected Christ to mysteries long buried. If such things were real, then condemning the order openly would only draw eyes toward them. Better to strike their name from the record and let time bury them in obscurity. Others saw the silence as complicity. The Black Knights, they said, existed because Rome allowed it. Useful when enemies needed to be crushed in shadows, forgotten when peace required clean hands. Picture a battlefield once more. The Hospitallers ride with banners blessed by Rome. The Teutons march with songs of faith. The Black Knights ride in silence. When the war is done, the Hospitallers are celebrated, the Teutons recorded. The Black Knights vanish into mist. And in Rome, no words are written. This absence was not neutral. It was deliberate. For the medieval world, this made them all the more terrifying. Rome named demons. Rome named saints. Rome named heretics. But Rome did not name the Black Knights. And in that refusal, people saw mystery deeper than any curse. To be unnamed by the most powerful voice of the age was to live forever in shadow. Even today, this silence lingers in the archives. Historians flip through manuscripts, searching for a decree, a condemnation, a blessing. They find nothing but hints, margins, vague warnings. The Black Knights remain ghosts on the page, flickering between myth and history. Their silence and Rome's silence echo together across time. Close your eyes tonight and step into those cathedral halls. Hear the sermon. The priest speaks of brotherhoods in shadow, of dangers to faith, of oaths sworn in silence. But he never names them. The candles flicker, the people whisper, and the silence says more than words ever could. The Black Knights lived in that silence. Rome left them there. And centuries later, we still wonder if that silence was ignorance or intent. History remembers armies through banners. The red cross of the Templars, the white cross of the Hospitallers, the black and white cross of the Teutons. But the Black Knights left no banner. They left only moments, sudden, terrifying, unforgettable. Imagine a skirmish on the borderlands of France in the late 13th century. Exhausted soldiers, their lines breaking, their courage drained. The enemy pushes forward, certain of victory. Then, out of the mist, comes thunder. Not the thunder of storms, but the thunder of hooves. Black riders surge forward, No banners, no cries, no colors, only silence and steel. They cut through the enemy lines with precision, like a blade through cloth. Within hours, the battle is turned. When dawn breaks, the field is scattered with corpses. Survivors search for their mysterious allies, but find nothing. No tents, no fallen knights, no trace. Only victory and silence. The chronicler who recorded this called them simply men without name. In Spain, during the long wars of the Reconquista, stories tell of dawn battles where cloaked horsemen rode into Moorish lines, fighting like phantoms, then disappearing into the hills. Commanders argued, were they mercenaries, saints, or demons? Peasants sang of dark angels who appeared when all hope was lost. But none could say where they went when the fighting was done. In Germany, chronicles of clashes with pagan tribes mention unknown riders arriving at nightfall, their black cloaks blending with twilight. They struck so fiercely that the enemy fled before torches could be lit. And when soldiers sought them afterward, only hoofprints remained, leading into forests that swallowed every trail. The pattern is always the same: arrival, shock, disappearance, never staying, never claiming reward, never leaving proof. In a world obsessed with record and recognition, their refusal to be named was stranger than their victories. For knights sought land, gold, and glory. Armies fought for kings and crosses. But the Black Knights fought as if they sought nothing at all. Some historians dismiss these tales as confusion. Mercenary bands with no allegiance, mistaken for something greater. But the consistency is striking. Across France, Spain, and Germany, the descriptions repeat. Blackened armor, silent advance, sudden vanishing. Coincidence, or memory too heavy to be invention? Imagine standing in such a battle. Smoke thick, arrows whistling, fear gnawing your heart. And then, from nowhere, shadows charge. They do not speak. They do not raise banners. They move as if bound by one will. And just as quickly as they appear, they are gone. Would you believe they were ordinary men? Or would you believe you had seen something otherworldly? Death itself, riding in black? One monk in Burgundy wrote of such a battle. His words hurried, as if afraid to dwell too long. He described riders clad in dark iron who cut through soldiers with terrible silence. Another scribe in Bohemia mentioned cloaked horsemen at a siege, their armor strange and blackened. In Aragon, a chronicler spoke of riders seen near a monastery during unrest, never attacking, but frightening villagers who believed they were spirits. Always the same image, always the same uncertainty. Even their silence in war became part of their weapon. Other knights shouted war cries, blew horns, sang hymns. The Black Knights rode without a sound. To face them was to face your own thoughts, your own terror, reflected in their silence. Enemies confessed that silence was worse than noise. For in noise, you could lose yourself. In silence, you could hear your own fear. Perhaps this was their genius. They did not need numbers. They did not need banners. They needed only shadows, and shadows were enough. Picture the end of such a battle. The smoke clears. Survivors stumble across the field, dazed, searching for allies. The banners of kings still wave. The crosses of holy orders still fly. But the men in black are gone. No campfires. No wounded. No dead. As though they had never existed at all. And yet, their absence is proof enough. For victories were credited to unknown riders. And in medieval records, to be unnamed was more unsettling than to be condemned. The Black Knights became phantoms of war, appearing at desperate moments, shifting the balance, then dissolving into mist. To some they were saviors, to others specters. To all they were unforgettable. Their battles left no monuments, their victories left no statues, but their silence left legend. Close your eyes tonight and stand again on the battlefield. Hear the clash fade into quiet. Smell the smoke, taste the iron of blood in the air. And then, from nowhere, feel the ground tremble beneath hooves. See shadows in black cloaks riding past, their swords flashing once, twice, before vanishing into the haze. When you open your eyes, the battle is over, and you are left to wonder, were they men? Or were they shadows of something more? The legend of the Black Knights is not simple. It never was. For some, they were saviors, dark riders who spared the weak, who defended villages when no one else would. For others, they were destroyers, phantoms who left only ash and silence in their wake. Their reputation flickered like firelight, gentle in one moment, merciless in the next. In France, peasants told of a raid where mercenaries plundered a poor town, dragging villagers from their homes. Then, suddenly, riders in black descended. They cut down the raiders swiftly but touched no villager, no child, no widow. When dawn broke, the people found bread and grain left in the church. Gifts, they whispered, from the knights in black. Candles were lit in ruined chapels. Peasants kneeling to give thanks for angels who wore the color of night. Yet in Poland, another tale spoke of fire. After a bloody battle, the Black Knights torched the countryside. Fields salted, cottages burned, families left with nothing but smoke in the air. Survivors swore they had seen cloaked figures riding away through the haze, their armor glowing like embers. Here, they were not saviors, but executioners. Two faces, two shadows, mercy and fire. Which was true? Perhaps both. Some monks suggested that the Black Knights judged by their own law, sparing those they deemed innocent while unleashing wrath upon the guilty. Not justice as kings declared it, not mercy as Rome preached it, a code known only to them, invisible to outsiders. This would explain why stories contradict each other, because the knights did not follow the laws of crowns or the rules of the church. They followed their vow, a vow sealed in blood, whose meaning was theirs alone to interpret. And so one village sang their praises, while another cursed their name. Picture a small French hamlet, its people starving after war. Raiders descend, torches in hand. Suddenly, the sound of hooves, the shimmer of black steel. Strangers ride in silence, strike swiftly and vanish, leaving the villagers alive, their children safe. The story spreads. Protectors in black. Now but picture a Polish plain. Lords rebel against their king. The Black Knights arrive not to save, but to punish. They burn crops, topple homes, scatter survivors. Those who flee whisper of demons in armor, heralds of wrath. One brotherhood, two memories, both carved into the same legend. This contradiction frightened people most of all. For enemies can be fought, allies can be trusted. But what do you do with figures who might save you one day and destroy you the next? To peasants, the uncertainty was worse than certainty. They never knew what the arrival of black riders meant, rescue or ruin. And so the name of the Black Knights became both blessing and curse, spoken in gratitude by some, in fear by others. Historians, centuries later, argue that such contradictions are the mark of myth, that no order could be so inconsistent, that stories of mercy and fire are simply folk memory, one village weaving them into heroes, another painting them as villains. But perhaps inconsistency was their truest nature. bound only to their vow, they had no obligation to kings, no duty to priests, no loyalty to laws. They judged as they saw fit. And that freedom from the structures that bound all other knights, made them both more merciful and more dangerous. Imagine a knight removing every symbol of house, crown, and cross. No crest, no banner, no vow to pope or king, only the black cloak, only the silence, only the brotherhood. Such a knight would be terrifying, because he answered to nothing you could see. And in that freedom lies the paradox. They could save without permission. They could destroy without consequence. In the end, mercy and fire were not contradictions, but two sides of the same coin. To some, their silence meant compassion. To others, it meant death. To all, it meant unpredictability. And unpredictability is power. Close your eyes tonight and picture them once more. A circle of riders at the edge of your village. Their cloaks ripple in the wind, their armor blackened like embers. You cannot see their faces. You do not know their law. Will they leave bread on your altar or flames on your roof? You do not know. You cannot know. And that is what makes them unforgettable. The Black Knights lived between mercy and fire, between protector and punisher, between blessing and curse. And perhaps it was this duality, the uncertainty of their arrival, that made them more feared, more revered, and more enduring than any order that came before or after. The medieval world had little room for secrets. Every order, every brotherhood sought legitimacy. Charters signed by popes, alliances sworn to kings, banners lifted high in battle. Visibility was power. And so the Black Knights, nameless, silent, without crests, were more than a mystery. They were a threat. The Hospitallers, guardians of the sick as well as warriors of Christ, could not comprehend them. To the Hospitallers, honor was service made visible. White crosses stitched proudly on their cloaks, hospitals raised for all to see, vows sworn before priests. The Black Knights were the opposite. Hidden, wordless, refusing to display holy symbols. To the Hospitallers, this secrecy was heresy in disguise. How could knights of God conceal their allegiance? How could they fight without declaring whose banner they carried? Some whispered that the Black Knights sought to steal influence, drawing soldiers away with promises of freedom rather than faith. The Teutonic Knights were more alarmed still. Their power came from visibility. Castles built across the Baltic, banners planted in conquered lands, chronicles filled with their victories. They thrived on order, hierarchy, discipline. But the Black Knights answered to none of these. They did not build castles. They did not carve out territories. They did not record their triumphs in parchment. And yet, they seemed to appear where battles raged most fiercely, claiming victories without reward, leaving enemies trembling and vanishing before the chroniclers could write their names. To the Teutons, this was worse than heresy. It was competition. Imagine the uneasy encounters whispered of in taverns. A Hospitaller company rides into a campaign, expecting allies. But when the Black Knights appear, cloaked and nameless, the Hospitallers mutter that they cannot trust men who hide their vows. In the East, Teutonic leaders warn their troops, beware infiltration, for the Black Knights could walk among you with no crest to betray them. Chronicles hint at brawls between orders, sudden midnight clashes in camps where words turn to steel. No scribe records the causes. No one records the outcomes. Perhaps both sides buried the shame of fighting supposed allies. Rumors spread that the Black Knights lured recruits away from their rivals. For the Hospitallers and the Teutons demanded lineage, noble blood, vows before priests. But the Black Knights demanded only silence and loyalty. To a disillusioned mercenary, a poor squire, even an outlaw seeking redemption, the Black Cloak was a door that other orders kept closed. Recruitment was the lifeblood of every brotherhood. To lose men to a rival, especially one wrapped in secrecy, was intolerable. And so resentment festered. The Hospitallers lobbied Rome, it was said, whispering that these shadowy figures were impostors, unworthy of blessing. But Rome remained silent, refusing to name them either holy or heretic. The Teutons, meanwhile, saw them as saboteurs, dark riders who won victories but claimed no credit, undermining Teutonic authority by proving that wars could be won without banners, without recognition. For an order obsessed with structure, nothing was more threatening than chaos. Imagine sitting in a Teutonic hall, its walls heavy with banners, its chronicles filled with names and dates. Then imagine whispers of a brotherhood with no banners, no names, no chronicles, yet still remembered in villages, still sung of in ballads. To the Teutons, this was unbearable. For how could order defeat shadow? The rivalries may never have erupted into open war, but the tension left marks. Chronicles grow vague, as if unwilling to dwell too long on these encounters. Perhaps monks knew the danger of writing too clearly, or perhaps the Black Knight's silence infected even their rivals' pens. Yet the whispers survive. Stories of refused alliances, of brawls in camps, of suspicion so deep that brothers of the sword would not ride beside one another. In the end, this rivalry may have deepened the Black Knight's isolation. Neither welcomed as brothers nor destroyed as enemies. They existed in a gray space that unsettled both allies and foes. To peasants, this only heightened their mystery. To rival orders, it made them intolerable. To Rome, it made them convenient. Figures who could be used in silence, erased in silence. Close your eyes tonight and imagine the war camps. Hospitallers polishing their white crosses. Teutons sharpening blades beneath their black and white banners. And beyond the firelight, a company of cloaked figures. No crests, no prayers, only silence. The others glance nervously, muttering under their breath. Allies, or usurpers, brothers, or shadows? The silence offers no answer. Perhaps this is why the Black Knights endured as legend, while their rivals endured as history. For history remembers those who built castles, carved territories, raised hospitals. But legend remembers those who unsettled even their allies, those who walked between acceptance and rejection, between recognition and erasure. The Hospitallers and the Teutons feared them. Rome ignored them, the people remembered them. And in that strange balance, their shadow grew deeper.